Ashley, and today I am going to do a real-time tutorial on some water lilies. So this is a little bit Monet inspired with all of his water lily paintings. I didn't use one of his compositions as a reference or anything. I kind of blended some different photos that I saw and also just imagination to create this painting, but I'll put the main reference photo that I used for the water lilies, which was open source. So you'll have that here. So I'm going to show you how to paint these water lilies in watercolor. So let's flow right into it. I'm going to be using the Academy watercolor pad, and I'm actually going to tape it off because I want the final painting to be 8x10 instead of 8x12, just so that if I want to frame it, it's a little bit easier to do that. And so I'm going to grab some tape, and this is cold press 100% cotton. I love the Bong Academy watercolor paper. It is their student grade, but it's 100% cotton. It's nice, heavy weight, it's 300 GSM, and it reacts pretty much the same as their professional grade paper. I would say the Academy is a little bit less textured than the professional grade. So sometimes I like to use rough, especially in Academy, but it is still textured cold pressed paper. I have my Winsor & Newton watercolors here in my palette, so a variety of colors. I haven't decided which colors I'm going to use yet, but we'll see as we go. And then I plan to use my Degato watercolor brushes. So I have my synthetic ones, which are just a round, like snappier brush. They hold enough water, but not too much. And I have a size 20 and a size 10. So they're pretty big brushes. I have other sizes as well. So I have like this size 2 that I might use for some small details. And then I have this size 4 Degato squirrel hair brush. So this is a lot softer brush. It holds a lot more water. So it'll be good to add nice big washes if I want to. So I have that available. I have a ton of other brushes also that I might be grabbing from. I'll try to remember to say what I'm using as I go. I also have a couple like little detail brushes. So this is a Princeton Select Fine Liner. I might use that. And this is a Giorgione number 2. They call it a liner. I would not consider this a liner brush. I would consider it just a small round like detail brush, because a liner brush typically has longer bristles to create really long fluid lines. But this is a really nice detail brush. So let me grab my tape. Okay, so basically I'm just doing 1 inch on either side. To get it down to 10 inches. Okay, and then I'm just gonna measure and make sure it's approximately 10 inches at the top and bottom. So the top is, but the bottom isn't, which means that I angled one of these in too much. I think it's this side. Let's see. Yeah, it's definitely this side. So kind of just lift that back up. There we go. Make sure that's closer. Perfect. Okay, so it doesn't have to be perfect because I'm going to do kind of a like a vignette style. So I'm not going to go all the way to the edges. Ideally, we'll see if I remember that. Sometimes I start thinking that way and then I don't actually remember to do that. So we're going to try. And I'm going to start actually wet on dry. So sometimes I like to wet up the whole paper and start wet on wet, but for this one I'm going to start wet on dry. And I'm going to take my very large, so this is a size 20. Actually, I'm going to start with my size 10 because I want to mark out some lily pads first. So I'm kind of combining a couple of reference photos here and doing some from imagination, but basically it's going to be lily pads, and I'm probably going to put some like reeds in the background and things like that. But we're gonna start by marking out some of those lily pads. And so I'm just gonna start by getting some cobalt blue, and I'm mixing it in this green well that I have here. So it's not gonna be clean cobalt blue or anything. And I'm gonna water that down a lot so that it's not too dark, because I wanna be able to go over it later. But this is just gonna start getting me an idea of where I want some of these lily pads. Okay, and we're just gonna kind of, again, mark out some shapes here. So we're gonna get shape there, and it's kind of gonna be bumping in to another one here. Okay. And then we'll have a little bit of separation. Here. Maybe some smaller ones up front. Okay. And I'm kind of just doing the bottom edge right now of these. And as they get farther back, I'm kind of making the curve a little bit flatter. And in theory, they're going to be a little bit smaller as we get farther back also. Though the lily pads can all be different sizes. So if some of them are, like these ones are smaller than this one, this is kind of my focal point, that's fine because lily pads come in different sizes. Okay, and then I'm gonna mark out some of the flowers. Okay, so there's gonna be a flower on this one here. Again, that's kind of my focal point. So I'm just gonna kind of mark that out with some jagged shapes so that I remember not to paint over that when I'm doing my water. So I'm gonna be doing some negative painting around that shape. Okay, there we go. And so that's gonna have the water around it. Okay, and then let's get another one. That's kind of my focal point. I'm gonna do a smaller one back here. And so I'm basically just sketching in the outline of these shapes. And then I think I'm going to do a third one over here. So maybe I'll add another lily pad right here and do one on top of it. Again, a little bit smaller. So there's kind of the basic layout of my lily pads. And now I'm going to kind of get the rest of the shapes drawn in. And I don't want them to be perfectly oval or anything because it is nature, and nature is not always perfect. It's really never perfect. Gives the impression of perfection though. Okay. And again, by making these nice and light, I can go over them later and kind of edit the shapes more if I need to. Trying to make the ones in the back a little bit flatter. A little bit smaller. Okay, so there are my lily pads, and now I'm just going to get in kind of the back edge here where I'm going to have some change, like from the water to the background. And I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily put that in really, really pale, because I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do in the background yet, but that way I can have kind of that horizon line. Okay, now I'm going to start adding in some water. And I want my water to be really, really loose, and I want it to be varied in color. So I am going to get that cobalt and start with that. I do have a lot of water on the brush, okay? And it's very watered down cobalt. And I'm going to hold my brush really flat to the page and do dry brushing, okay? And so even though I have a lot of water on the brush, I can still get those textural marks because I'm going fast and holding the brush flat to the page, okay? And some areas I want it to be denser than others. I'm gonna go back in and add shadows underneath so the lily pads, so those areas can definitely be denser. I think I'm gonna switch to my larger brush now, just to cover a little bit more area. Mix up a little bit more of that cobalt. Make sure I have plenty of water. I don't want it dripping off, but I do want a lot of water, and then I'm just gonna brush that across. Okay, and I'm keeping all of my brush strokes horizontal because I want all of that texture to be angling kind of the same direction. And the white areas are going to be basically like the sunlight glimmering off of the water. And I'm just being careful to paint around my lily pads and around my flowers. Okay, now I'm going to take some green, and I'm just going to take some sap green and mix that in with my blue. And I'm going to add some greens into the water. Okay, now some of these areas are wet, so it's going to bleed and blend, and that's okay. Okay, and then other areas that have more of the white space, it's going to pick up that texture more. Okay, so just let it do what it wants on the page, and it's just going to add variety here into the water. So I'm kind of thinking about putting more of the greens under the lily pads and leaving some of the areas in between a little bit more blue, just so that maybe it looks a little bit like a reflection. Okay, but it doesn't have to only be that. because these ponds are gonna have lots of green in them too. Okay, now I'm gonna add some pink. Okay, so I'm gonna take my permanent rose, and I'm actually gonna clean out this well, which I don't normally do, but I don't want this muddy red in my mixture that was from previous paintings. So I'm just gonna kind of clean out that well a little bit. Kind of lift up some of that paint. Okay. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but that gives me a cleaner well here to do some of my pink. Okay. And then I'm gonna add a bunch of water to it. And this is a pretty intense pink, so adding even more water to it than I did to the greens and the blues. And then just making sure that I don't have very much water, because now that there's more water on the page, I want to make sure that I have a little bit less water on my brush. So kind of understanding that about water control is important. And I'm just going to add in some pinks to my water. And this is almost just glazing over some areas. And it's going to make some of the, it's going to mix on the page. It's called optical mixing, and create almost some browns in some areas that had the greens and some purples in some areas that had more of the blues. Okay. Now, because I'm going to paint my lilies, they're going to have a pink hue to them. Some areas, I'm going to add a little bit of pink, just bleeding it in under where those water lilies are going to be, to get a reflection. Okay. And I want to make sure that it's not solid there. Okay. So let me add in just a touch more blue around this one. A little bit of green. Okay. And I can always go back in and add more to the water. I will go back in and add more to the water because it's not going to be dark enough. This is just our first layer. Okay. Now I'm going to go in with a smaller brush, so I'm going back to that size 10, and I'm going to get a yellowy green. So I'm going to start with sap green, and then I'm going to mix in some of my lemon yellow deep to get a very yellowy, like bright, springy green. Okay, and that's what I'm going to start with on the lily pads. It's going to feel really bright, and but it's watered down, so it's not going to be really dark. It's going to be a nice fresh layer, and I'm just going to put that over my lily pads. And I'm not worrying about making it a flat, even wash, because if there's some like cauliflowers in here, I'm okay with that if it doesn't dry evenly. Okay, under the flowers is going to be green too. Now I'm going to lift some areas to create some highlights. So I'm just taking my brush, pulling it across, and then wiping it on a towel to dry it off. And that's how you can lift out some color while it's still wet. If it was dry, you would have to go in and add some water to the place where you're trying to lift first. Okay. There we go. Now I'm going to start adding a little bit of detail around the lily pad. So I'm going to get a little bit more of my green and add just a little bit of my permanent rose to it to make it a browner, more brown color. Okay. And I'm going to add that along the edge of my lily pads, especially the bottom edge where it might be folded up a little bit, and you're going to see some of the underside of it. And it can be different thicknesses because that will show more of that fold. Okay, so if I want to make, let's say this one is like actually folded up, I'm going to add in, mix some more here. And this is a lot thicker paint. It has a lot less water in it. Okay, so I'm going to add in along the bottom here. Ooh, bleeding, that's okay. Just lift that back up. Too much water on my brush. So dab it off so that I don't have that much water, and try again. And it's still gonna bleed because it's wet. Okay, I'll come back to that in a second because it needs to be drier for what I'm about to do. Okay. A really light touch. Okay, so like here, if I want this to be folded up, I would do a little bit of a thicker mark there. Okay, lift up some of it because it's a little bit dark. And it doesn't have to be solid either. There can be areas where you don't have a line, and that works too. So here I'm going to make it a bigger fold. Okay, and then lift up again to lighten it. And I can add in some different colors too. I will in a second. And so it's nice to not have the steadiest hand on this because you can get a little bit more variety in your marks there. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit of yellow ochre. And my brush is all dirty, but I'm going to add some yellow ochre in and get that tapped in to some areas here too. Okay. Okay, clean off my brush, get some more pure yellow ochre. Okay. And that's just giving it a little bit of a more brown hue to the underside here of some of these. Okay. And then take some of that loosely around some of the other edges to give it a little bit of variety on the lily pad. So just barely tapping and then kind of scrubbing a little bit. Very, very lightly though, so that you pick up some of the texture of the paper. Okay. And then just a little bit of a greenish or of a bluish green here to get a little shadow along the edge of some of these. Like maybe they're folded up on the other side as well. Okay. So like this one could be kind of folded up there. Just add some variety. It doesn't have to be the same for all of them, but adding the same colors to all of them is important so that it's cohesive. So you wouldn't want to add like a brown to one and not to any of the others, because that would look weird. Blend that out just a little bit. Okay. Now, oops, I'm gonna mix up some of my brown again, that brownish green, so sap green in the permanent rose. And I'm gonna add that to my middle one here. Okay. And then a little bit of yellow ochre. A little bit of the bluish green for a shadow. Okay. And the bluish green is basically going to be the cobalt mixed with my sap green, but it has other things in that well as well from other paintings, but I'm not worried about it. Okay, so there are the lily pads. Now I'm going to go in and do the lilies themselves. And these ones are, this is a little bit more challenging because I don't know why, they just are. But I'm just going to lay in some water first on this main one. And then we're going to have like the brightest pink kind of toward the middle. And so this is wet on wet, so I'm going to let it bleed out and just add some of that pink in. Okay, and then I'll go in and define it later. Okay, we'll try that. See how that works. Lift up a little bit of it. I don't know if I like the idea of wet and wet. I think the back ones, I don't know why I started with the front one. The back one's wet and wet would make more sense because they're out of focus, right? So let me add in some pink to those ones. A little bit more concentrated toward the middle. I'm gonna use some of my brownish green mix, but add more yellow ochre into it. And then paint the outside where the buds opened. Okay. And so I'm just kind of thinking about petal and leaf shapes and painting that so it's kind of curved all toward this kind of bottom center. Okay, leave some highlights there. So just some unpainted space. Then get in a little bit of a shadow along the bottom. And the sides. Of it. Okay, maybe there's another one here that is kind of fell out to the side. Okay. All right. And then we'll do the same thing for this one in the back. So kind of paint one here. One kind of up off the side. Okay. Now I'll take some pink. I think I want to tone it down a little bit. It's just a little too like bubblegum pink for me. So just adding some of the sap green to it to tone it down. And then I'm going to put that in and create some petals here. A little bit more brightness. Okay. And I don't have very much water on the brush, so they're kind of getting textural. And I actually like that, so I'm gonna go ahead and go with that on these marks. Okay, and a little bit of water. Blend some of them out and add the hint of some other petals kind of behind them. Okay. And then same with this one in the back. So we're just gonna have some petal shapes in the front. Okay, that looks pretty good. We add just a little bit of definition on that one. Okay, I like those. Now I've got to paint this one, which is more the focal point. So be a little bit more precise with it, but not too much, because I still want it to be loose and look natural and not forced. Okay. This one's going to be open all the way, so the little bud part is going to be flat here. Okay. Just a little bit of yellow ochre. And then we're going to have our pinks. Okay. Trying to get a little bit of some layers in there. And then a few. Up toward the back. Kind of blend them down. Okay, and then I'm just going to add a touch of shadow in between some of them. Now it's wet, so it is going to bleed a little bit. So I just want to be cautious here. And I can always wait for it to dry and add a little bit more detail after. Which I should probably do, because sometimes I'm not patient enough. We're going to pause there on that one and come back to it in a minute for the actual flower. Add just a little bit more of this brownish green here. Add a little bit of variety. To those areas. Now I'm definitely going to need some shadow under that. A little bit more blue. And add that shadow. There we go. Looks better. Add that color back here. The shadow. And here. Maybe a touch of brown. Okay, there we go. All right, now I'm going to start adding some shadows underneath the lily pads themselves. So these are going to be kind of purple. Okay, so I have cobalt and permanent rose. And then I'm just going to add a touch of green to it to make it even darker and to mute it a little bit so that it's not quite so bright. And I'm going to add that underneath the lily pads. And then kind of just zigzag it out and away. Okay, so take off some of the color in the water and then add that in. Just kind of pull it away. Okay. Then do that same thing kind of for each one. And this is going to further define the shape of the lily pads. So this is an area where if I didn't like some of the darks that I added, I can go in and edit it a little bit with adding the shadow underneath. Okay. Add a little bit more cobalt to it in the darkest areas. Make it even a little bit more blue. Okay. And by mixing the purple from the colors that I used in the water in the painting already, it makes it a much more natural feel and cohesive rather than using a pre-mixed, a convenience purple. Okay, so this step is slightly tedious, but kind of in a good way, in a nice way. I like this little detail portion here. And it's just adding that texture and that extra depth to it. And I'm trying to get the most depth here at the focal point. Okay, so I am adding the deepest contrasts. Darkest colors are going to be there. I'm lifting up a highlight here for the edge of the lily pad. Okay. I gotta do these ones over here. Great. Now I'm going to add some more dry brushing to the water. So I'm going to add some pale purple in. focusing more on the front, the part that's the bottom part, the part that's closest to us, and a little bit less on the parts in the back. I do want to add a little bit of that color, but not a ton. I want the front to be much more layered, more depth to that. Okay, adding in just some cobalt now, make it more blue. And then a little bit of the cobalt mixed with my greens. I'm going to go in around some of the petals here. There we go. All right, now I'm going to add a little bit more depth to this front lily. Okay, add just some lines to this petal. There we go. Lift again to bring back some of the highlights and just to create a little bit of texture. Okay. Now we got to figure out what we're going to do with the background. So my reference photo has some like rocks along the edge, but I'm thinking I want to do it a little bit more natural and do maybe some like reeds. So I'm going to start with some just yellow ochre. It's got some green mixed in with it. That's okay. And I'm just going to take that and loosely see about putting in some reeds here. I'm gonna kind of do it on the whole right side. And as it's running out of paint, I'm getting some dry brushing, which I appreciate the look of, and it's lighter marks. Okay, now I'm going to take some of my yellowy green, so the sap green and lemon yellow, and get some of those in. And this has very little water in it, so it's just making those nice broken textural marks again. Okay, I did add, I'm just kind of grabbing from this green well, so there was some purple in there, so we're gonna get some more darkness now, and I'm just adding layers of green to it. Just letting whatever happens happen, and I'm flicking the brush nice and quick. So that I get nice thin and natural marks. I'm not trying to be precise in where I put them at all. And I'm just getting darker as I go. So I'm actually going to add some more purple in on purpose. And I am just using a convenience purple here, that's Winsor Violet. And this is going to be really dark. Now I'm going to kind of blend out the bottom of that a little bit to get the impression that it's going into the water there. And maybe add a little bit of green underneath. Dot in some of the deep green to be some shadow and reflection along the bottom there. Kind of doing those same flicky marks, and then I'm gonna go horizontally just lightly over them to make them have some movement. There we go. Okay. And then I'm gonna add some of this kind of reddish color. This is going to be maybe permanent rose or alizarin crimson, I don't know, mixed with the yellow ochre. And that's going to be kind of an orangey color. And I'm going to add that onto some of these reeds, like they have, they like cattails, something like that. Just in a few places. Okay. lighten up the ones that are farther away. There we go. And then add a little bit of brown for a slight shadow. There we go. Some between, like they're deeper in there. Okay. Now I'm going to take my squirrel hairbrush and I am going to add some water over to this side. Okay. And then I'm just going to add some bluish green. Just to give it some color in the background, maybe look like there's some trees or something back there. Putting some behind the reeds too, so just this part I didn't add water to first because I don't want it to bleed out too much. So just add a little bit behind there. And then add a little bit more color. And do kind of another layer of darker. It's gonna bleed in to that top layer, and that's okay. But just to get a little bit of color into the background. A little bit extra at that top edge. And then I'm going to let it bleed down into where the water is here. Lift up some areas. Now, I think I do want to add just a little bit more darkness in some areas, just to bump up that contrast a little bit more. So I'm going to add a little bit of an ultramarine blue, because it'll make it even darker. A little bit of yellow ochre to mute it. Okay. Now, this is going to feel really dark because it's very concentrated. So I'm just going to add that in. Okay, and we're just getting that into the very darkest areas of the painting. And with a very light touch, I can go and zigzag away from it a little bit, but very, very light touch. Because I don't want too much of this really dark color anywhere. Okay. Now I'm going to add a little bit more of shadow to some of the areas on the lily pads. So making a nice brownish green here. Nice and dark. All right. Now a little bit more thick yellow ochre. Adding that to some of these areas. Now I do want to glaze on some of these lily pads because they're just a little too pale. So I'm going to take some of my sap green, water it down a lot, add some yellow to it, make it, oops, that's a lot of yellow. Make it a nice bright, fresh green, and glaze over. Okay, so a glaze is a very thin wash that has a lot of water, and you just layer it over the previous layer, and it adds a lot of depth. And again, it creates that optical mixing. So I can lay this yellow over the more blue areas, and it's gonna brighten it up and make it a brighter green. Okay. Add a little bit of definition between some of the areas. Okay. Now I think I want just a little bit more pink in some of my reflections. So I'm going to take a nice loose wash of pink and layer that in with some dry brushing underneath where the lilies are. Okay, and then maybe some more green also to look like a little bit more reflection of those lily pads. And then some more blue. My wells are all messed up now with my colors, but that's okay. More blue in the background. Pull the blue off toward the edge in some areas. Okay, I'm going to add just a little bit more darkness into some of the greens here in the reeds, just to get a little bit more depth back there. Okay. There we go. All right, now I'm just kind of fiddling. I probably should stop, but I want this one to have a little bit more darkness in some areas. So I'm just adding a few simple brush strokes. There we go. Maybe even a touch of purple along the bottom to really bump up that shadow a little bit. All right. I think that's done. I just have to sign it and then it'll be all done. Once again, here is that completed water lilies painting, and I really enjoyed painting this one. It was really fun getting the details in. It didn't take too long, but we were able to create a lot of depth with shadows and then the layers of the dry brushing to create a lot of different colors and depth into the water. So I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, consider giving the video a like. It would really help out the video and my channel. And subscribe for tons more content. I have a lot of other real-time tutorials so that you can follow step by step and develop your skills that way. And also a lot of informational type content that you can peruse and enjoy, and I hope it's helpful. So thank you again so much for watching, and until next time, keep those paints flowing.